described as being at rest or at peace. But as we know from these stories I have been telling you, death and rest are not always synonymous. Or take the case of the Chase family in Barbados during the first half of the last century. They owned a family vault in the graveyard of Christ Church at Oystons Bay on the south side of the island. The vault was solidly built of blocks of coral and half sunk into the ground. It was 12 feet long and 6 feet wide, and its top was covered by a huge slab of marble. The first two interments took place without anything out of the ordinary occurring. These were of Mrs. Thomasina Goddard on the 31st of July, 1807, and of the baby, Mary Anna Maria Chase, on the 22nd of February, 1808. But with the third burial, that of Dorcas Chase, the older sister of baby Mary Anna Maria, the mysterious pattern began. When the tomb was opened, the mourners were horrified to see the two coffins had somehow been displaced. Mary Anna Maria's was in the opposite corner to where it had been placed, and that of Mrs. Goddard seemed to have been thrown against the wall. The pallbearers and mourners repositioned the heavy lead-lined coffins and placed that of Dorcas reverently in the tomb on the 6th of July, 1812. Any speculation as to the cause of the disturbance of the coffins put the blame on the Negro slaves belonging to the oppressive and cruel head of the family, Thomas Chase. When the vault was next opened, on the 9th of August 1812, it was to receive the mortal remains of Thomas Chase himself, and everything was found to be in order. However, when 4 years later the tomb was reopened for the burial of a small boy, Samuel Brewster Ames, on the 25th of September 1816, once more the coffins were found to have become displaced. The funeral party replaced the coffins, added that of young Samuel, and resealed the door slab. Only 2 months later, the vault was reopened, this time to admit the body of Samuel Brewster, the grandfather of young Samuel. This was on the 17th of November 1816. By now, the mystery of the creeping coffins had become common knowledge around the island, and a crowd of curious onlookers waited with bated breath for what new revelations would come to light when the slab was removed from the tomb mouth. Their morbid curiosity was rewarded as light fell into the gloomy interior. All the coffins had moved. That of Thomasina Goddard seems to have been treated rather more violently than the others, and it had started to fall apart. All the mourners who were not overpowered by superstitious fears entered the vault and thoroughly sounded the walls and floor to check for any concealed openings. There were none. The coffins were repositioned, that of Mrs. Goddard being fastened together with a rope and pushed in an untidy bundle against the back wall. Finally, the door to the vault was cemented firmly in place. Over the next 3 years, thousands of curious visitors went to view the outside of the vault, but no one got a sight of the interior until the funeral of Thomasina Clark on the 17th of July, 1819. Because of the huge interest the case had generated, the governor of Barbados, Lord Combermere, and two of his staff attended the interment, along with hundreds of curious spectators. The cement was chipped away from the door, and the slab removed. Once more, the interior of the tomb was in complete chaos. All the coffins were tumbled about. Mr. Chase's, which with its occupant weighed so much that it required 8 men to carry it, had been moved a full 6 feet. I said all the coffins had moved, but that's not quite true. The battered remains of the first coffin, that of Mrs. Goddard, was still in position, piled against the wall. With the assistance of a team of terrified slaves, Lord Combermere had the coffins replaced, and a layer of fine sand sprinkled all over the floor of the tomb to reveal the footprints of any future unauthorized visitors to the place. The marble slab was then replaced and cemented in position. And just to make doubly sure, Lord Combermere and several others of the witnesses pressed their seals into the wet cement. On the 18th of April the following year, Combermere gathered 5 other important residents and a band of slaves and returned to the graveyard. The seals on the door were untouched, and the slaves were set the task of chipping away the cement and moving the marble slab. This was accompanied by a strange grating noise. When the slab was completely free of the doorway, the reason for the grating noise was discovered. One of the larger coffins had been thrown against the slab. You'll not be surprised to hear that once more, all of the coffins were displaced. Those of the children in particular were badly displaced. Mary Anna Maria's coffin had been thrown with such violence that it had chipped a piece out of the coral wall. Despite the confusion among the coffins, there was not a trace of footprints or tracks of any sort in the layer of sand on the floor. Combermere had had enough, and he gave orders that all the late occupants of the tomb were to be removed to quieter graves, and the tomb was to be sealed and left empty for all eternity. And so it remains today, without any satisfactory explanation for the coffin's unnerving habit of wandering.